the Maccabees and Jewish independence. So you may remember that we spent some time a week ago talking about this fella. His name was Antiochus IV. He called himself what? Anybody remember? Epiphanes. And what he meant by that was God manifest. Okay, that's what he called himself. That's what he expected people to call him. All right? He was... he took the idea of people worshiping him seriously, okay? So he called himself Epiphanes. The Jews gave him a nickname. Anybody remember the nickname? Epimanes, which means the madman, okay? And he did a lot of really unpleasant things to the Jews, outlawed the Jewish law, outlawed the scripture, outlawed circumcision, outlawed following the Sabbath day. That's all going to boil, okay, over time there in Judea. He's going to enforce pagan worship. And he does that by setting up altars in all the villages of the Jews, okay? And the people of those villages were expected to go and to sacrifice to the pagan gods that were set up. This was something he was really serious about, really interested in enforcing, because he viewed the problem with Jews not being very cooperative as a problem that was based in their law, okay? And so get rid of the law, make them to conform to being Greeks, and this whole problem is going to go away. At least that's what he thought. It did not work out well for him, okay? In 167 BC, an emissary was sent to the village of Modin to enforce this edict. So there's an altar that's set up. I'm going to send an emissary there from myself who's going to make sure that the people of Modin sacrifice on the pagan altar. All right? When he does that, there's a fellow there whose name is Mattathias. He's a priest. He's living in the village, and he's commanded to take the lead in offering the sacrifice, but he says no. He refuses to do that, okay? So here we have a Jewish priest who's being commanded to offer a pagan sacrifice. He refuses to do that, and that's going to get the ball rolling, okay? Mattathias won't do it, but another Jew steps forward and says, well, I'll do the sacrifice, okay? Because we want Antiochus IV to be not mad at us, okay? We want him to be happy with us. We don't want to have problems, so I'm going to make the sacrifice, all right? The result of that then is Mattathias is not quite done dealing with this, and so he kills the Jew as well as the king's officer. Okay, this is not going to end well, right? Killing the Jew, okay, you can get away with that because you're the priest and he's in the village and he shouldn't be doing that. We're going to kill. But you killed the king's officer. And so that's going to get them in trouble. Mattathias and his sons end up fleeing to the hills from the village, okay, because they're not going to be able to stick around. They know there's going to be reprisals for this. Others also flee and end up joining this rebel group. Antiochus himself is slow to recognize the strength of the revolt, okay? He hears about what's happened in Modin, but he's slow to recognize that he's going to have to deal with this in a very strong manner. And so he doesn't, all right? During this time when he's kind of deciding what he's going to do about this, some refugees then refuse to fight on the Sabbath, okay, as the reprisals are starting to come about, and they're slaughtered. Remember in an earlier class I said, remember this idea of Jews not fighting on the Sabbath. And what do you do with that? There's a couple of times in their history where the result of that was that they were slaughtered on the Sabbath. And that's what happens in this particular case as well. They refuse to fight on the Sabbath, and so they are slaughtered because of that refusal. That's going to be a question that they have to deal with. And so Mattathias and his group made a decision that they would fight if they were attacked on the Sabbath. So you can defend yourselves on the Sabbath, you just can't actually go on the attack against your enemies, okay? So defensive warfare is okay on the Sabbath, offensive is not okay on the Sabbath. That's a very pragmatic decision. What does the law say? What does the law say? What does the Jewish law say about on the Sabbath? What are you supposed to do? Well, you're not supposed to do any work, okay? Is the idea of fighting on the Sabbath directly addressed? No, it's not, okay? And so Jews are interpreting the law, and at least in 3 occasions, they interpret it to mean we're not going to fight back. The Mattathias and his family his sons realize that this rebellion is not going to work if we don't really take a look at this idea of fighting on the Sabbath and decide whether we really ought to be doing that or not. Okay? And their decision is offensive, not okay, defensive is okay. Mattathias himself dies a year later in 166 BC, so he's not the leader of the revolt very long. His son Simon takes over as chief counselor, and another son whose name was Judas becomes the military leader and gets the nickname the Maccabee. The Maccabee simply means the hammer, and so these folks, this family, are now known as the Maccabees or the Hammers. They're going to be leading this revolt. Interestingly enough, several years ago, I don't know how many of y'all remember this, but several years ago here in the States, if you went to the mall, there would be all these people selling different things in the center of the mall. Y'all kind of remember that? I know malls are kind of probably a lot of us don't go to the malls very much anymore, but they would all be selling perfume and cosmetics and stuff like that. Well, Ivana and I were walking through the mall, and there were some girls that were there, well, young women, that were there selling, I don't know, cosmetics or whatever. And they're very good about getting you to come over. And Ivana hates this because I'm very good about going over and listening to their spiel, however long that takes. We were talking to them, and they had an accent. So I asked them where they were from. Anybody take a guess where they're from? They were from Israel. For some reason, in those days, a whole lot of Israeli young people were coming over here and working these odd jobs in America, okay? And I guess then going back to Israel is, something fun to do, I guess. Well, as I was talking to them, I asked them where they were from in Israel. Take a guess where they were from. Anybody can guess? Not from Jerusalem, from Modin. And I looked at them, I said, oh, the hometown of the Maccabees. Blank look, okay? They had no idea what I was talking about. They had no idea what I was talking about. I was like, really? Y'all are the descendants of these people. You're living in their village and you don't know who they are. So next time somebody tells you that young Americans know nothing about history or geography, I can guarantee you young Americans are not the only ones that don't know anything about history or geography. It is a worldwide problem because here these girls were, they had no idea the history of their little village. So at any rate. All right, so I have a quote from y'all. Y'all have this in your papers, so you might want to read along in those. This is from the first book of Maccabees, chapter 2, verses 39 through 41. Remember, we've been reading from 1st and 2nd Maccabees periodically in this class where there are relevant texts. So, this is what the text says. When Mattathias and his friends learned of it, they mourned for them deeply. This concerns those Jews that were killed on the Sabbath. And all said to their neighbors, if we all do as our kindred have done, and refuse to fight with the Gentiles for our lives and for our ordinances, they will quickly destroy us from the earth. So they made this decision that day. Let us fight against anyone who comes to attack us on the Sabbath day. Let us not all die as our kindred died in the hiding place. All right? Very pragmatic approach to how they're going to interpret the idea of not working on the Sabbath day. All right, so a couple of more photos to show with y'all. If you went to Israel today and you went on a plane ride, the modern village of Modin would look something like that. I'm sure it's probably grown since that picture was made, but this is really still a place in Israel that you can go and see, and it is a Jewish area. Okay, this is an area that was settled by Jews. Today, it's settled by Jews. It's not a part of the West Bank or the Gaza Strip, and so you should be able to go there and visit. It's probably not on the top 10 list of places to go in Israel, simply because it's just one place associated with a very minor part of Jewish history. Where does everybody go when they go to Israel? Those of you who have been there, you go to Jerusalem, you go to Galilee, you see Nazareth, you see places like that. Probably not Modin, but it is on the list if you happen to have a whole lot of time and want to do that. All right, so at the same time this is going on in Judea, the Seleucid kingdom is attacked from the east by the Parthians, okay? We call them Parthians in this period. What are they called in the Old Testament period? Anybody know? Persians, okay? Persians, all right? So it's those people that are living out there in Persia, the Parthians, okay? They make an attack against the Seleucid kingdom in 167. This is while Mattathias is still alive. That's good for Mattathias, not good for the Seleucids, because now the Seleucids have to deal with two threats. They have to deal with the threat in Judea, and they have to deal with the threat from the Parthians as well. Antiochus simply cannot use all of his forces to end the revolt in Judea, which again is very good for the Jews. He leads one army east to deal with the Parthians. They are the larger threat, okay? They are the larger threat simply because they have more ability militarily to cause problems for the Seleucids, so he marches east to deal with them. He, however, leaves one of his generals, whose name was Lysias, to deal with the revolt in Judea. Okay, Lysias is not going to do a good job. Apollonius, who is another general, is defeated at Lebanon, not Lebanon, but Lebanon, in 167 BC. So here you've got Mattathias and his sons. Mattathias dies in 166. This victory takes place before he dies. When the Seleucids come after him, the Maccabees are able to successfully defeat them. Okay? There is a long history when you're attacking someone else in their home country of it not ending well for the attacker, okay? Because the Jews know their country, they know their people, they know the lay of the land. It's going to give them an advantage. It's really giving them an advantage that the Parthians are causing problems in the east. Saran, another general, is then defeated at Beth Horon in 166 BC. Then we have Gorgias, who's defeated at Emmaus later, 166 BC. All of these are Seleucid generals, and they're being defeated. Everywhere they come up against the Maccabees, they're losing. Lysias is then defeated again at Bethzur in 164 BC. So the Maccabees are doing a really good job of rebelling against the Seleucid kingdom, the Seleucid empire. All right, so victory after victory. Let's pull up a map here. I'm moving really, really quickly. If I'm talking too fast, somebody raise your hand and let me know, and I'll try to slow down. So just to give you an idea of where all this is happening, here's Modin. That's the village where all this gets started. And then we have all these battles that are being fought in here. Samaria is up here. So what, is this the southern part of the country or the northern part of the country? It's the southern part of the country, okay? It's not right around Jerusalem, but it's in that general area, okay? Samaria's here, Galilee's way up here in the north. It's off the map. At least it's off of this map, at any rate. All right, so some photographs to share with y'all. Again, if you go to Israel, if you've been to Israel, you know, everywhere you go is just filled with history. This is the Lebanon Valley, okay? So that's where that Seleucid defeat takes place. Here is another photograph to share with you. This is if I pull it up, then you'll see it. This is the Beth Horon Ridge. Okay, another significant Seleucid defeat is here at this location at the Beth Horon Ridge. Don't mind the donkey. He's just in the picture. And I like that picture, so I had to keep the donkey. All right? So let's do some labeling here on our next picture here. Next photograph. This is the Beth Horon Ridge. It's an aerial view of it from the southwest. So you kind of have to visualize that in your mind. You're looking from the southwest to the northeast, okay? And in that picture, way over here you have the Transjordan. That's all that area on the other side of the Jordan River. Here's upper Beth Horon. Here's lower Beth Horon, okay? Take a guess how they get the names upper and lower? Elevation, okay? Upper Beth Horon is higher up, lower Beth Horon is lower down. I remember living in the Czech Republic, saw this all the time. You'd have an upper village and a lower village, okay? Where we lived just before we moved here, there was upper Jeleni and there was lower Jeleni. And you could literally, if you went out to the edge of the hill that upper Jeleni was built on, you could look down and see lower Jeleni. So the people in upper Beth Horon, they would be able to see down to lower Beth Horon. You've got the Beth Horon Ridge there. It's where that significant defeat is. All right, so another quote. Okay, Cynthia, go ahead. We're going to have Aaron come with the mic today.
Back on the Mattathias, when they were trying to decide, fight on the Sabbath or not, and decided to go ahead and defend, did they consult God on that?
I'm not sure how to answer that question.
Well, I'm not sure how to ask it. I see they keep winning, so was God, I don't want to get okay with that thought. Because when they weren't fighting, they were getting killed. So where was God in that situation on that? With dying for the cause or?
I'm going to try to answer that question this way. Did they consult God? Probably. Did they get an answer? My guess would be no. Because there are no prophets during this period. Okay? And without there being prophets during this period, there wouldn't have been a way that God would have given them that answer. I'm not going to say they take a guess. I think they took an educated guess. I think they looked at the law and said, what does the law say we're not supposed to work? Does that specifically address this question? Their conclusion was probably yes, possibly, but we have to look at the circumstances. So if it's a defensive action, it would be permitted because after all, God wouldn't expect us to do what? Just let ourselves get slaughtered. I can't think of any episode in the Old Testament that would have necessarily given them specific guidance in this regard. So it was kind of a question. And we see that other Jews said, not even in self-defense. The Maccabees say, yes, in self-defense, not in offensive warfare. So we're not going to attack the Seleucids on the Sabbath day, but if they attack us, we're going to defend ourselves. They did well, okay? They did well. You know, the Seleucids don't seem, Antiochus is out dealing with the Parthians. The Seleucids don't seem to have very good generals to deal with this Jewish threat. Plus, the Jews are very highly motivated to win. After all, they're being persecuted. Jews are dying if they follow the law of Moses. Jews are dying if they refuse to give up the scriptures. Jews are dying if they circumcise their little boys. Jews are dying if they go to the caves to observe the Sabbath. So when you are being slaughtered, you are very highly motivated to win battles. We kind of have that in our history as well, don't we? The Americans that fought against the British were very highly motivated to win, because what was the cost of losing? Treason, hanging, losing your property, okay? So when that's what's hanging over you, you're highly motivated to win. The British soldiers, what would happen to them if they lost? Nothing. They'd get shipped off to India or wherever to fight the next war that the British Empire was fighting. So when you're on your own turf, you're defending your life, you're very highly motivated to do well. And doesn't mean you always will, but you have good motivation to do that. Aaron?
If I'm not mistaken, it's not like the Jews are lining up in the field and attack them. This is more of a guerrilla warfare.
It is guerrilla warfare. Absolutely. They have a much smaller army than the Seleucids have, and when you have a smaller army, you fight guerrilla warfare. Okay? The Germans learned that in World War II, and we learned that in Vietnam. That when the other side is fighting guerrilla warfare, it's really hard to defeat that kind of an enemy, especially when they're on their own turf. So when you're dealing with that, partisans, they would have been called in World War II, you know, the French resistance, the Polish resistance, they had to leave a lot of troops back off the front lines to deal with all of this stuff that was happening. And it's really hard to win in those circumstances. And they tend to wear you down. And that's kind of what we did with the British. And it helped that the French came and helped us out. But we kind of did that with the British too, that we wore them down. I mean, the American Revolution lasted how many years? First battle, 1775. When did Cornwallis surrender? I think it was 1883. Okay, it was an 8-year war. So it wore them down, especially when you're dealing with other things. All right, so that's the Beth Horon Ridge. Okay, let's read a quote then from the Maccabees. This is what the text says. When he approached the ascent of Beth Horon, Judas went out to meet him with a small company. That's the Seleucid general. But when they saw the army coming to meet them, they said to Judas, how can we, few as we are, fight against so great and so strong a multitude? And we are faint, for we have eaten nothing today. Judas replied, it is easy for many to be hemmed in by few, for in the sight of heaven there is no difference between saving by many or by few. So that is an appeal, Cynthia, that's an appeal to God, okay? If God is with us, we're going to win. So they certainly believe that God is giving them the victory. Verse 19. It is not on the size of the army that victory in battle depends, but strength comes from heaven. They come against us in great insolence and lawlessness to destroy us and our wives and our children and to despoil us. But we fight for our lives and our laws. He himself will crush them before us. As for you, do not be afraid of them. When he finished speaking, he rushed suddenly against Saron and his army, and they were crushed before him. They pursued them down the ascent of Beth Horon to the plain. 800 of them fell, and the rest fled into the land of the Philistines. So, geographically, going back to that map, who's got the upper ground? The Jews do. Who has the lower ground? Who's going up the hill? The Seleucids do. Is it easier or harder to attack uphill? It's harder to attack uphill. So they have the advantage as well in the terrain. Okay. Then Judas and his brothers began to be feared, and terror fell on the Gentiles all around them. His fame reached the king, and the Gentiles talked of the battles of Judas. This is 1 Maccabees chapter 3, verses 16 through 26. But they are appealing, at least according to the author of Maccabees, they are appealing to what? That God is on their side. Okay? Now, from a practical standpoint, and I don't necessarily want to get into a long discussion about this, most of y'all know that I believe very firmly that God reigns in the kingdom of men. We see that in the Old Testament. I see that in the New Testament as well. I don't see any change in that regard. So from a practical standpoint, whether whether they have a thus saith the Lord, would it be fair to say that they are victorious because God gives them the victory? I think so, okay? And remembering that the intertestamental period, what's going on during this period is God is setting things up for who? He's setting things up for Christ, okay? So you're going to have this period of Jewish independence that then is going to be followed by them under Roman rule that sets the stage for the coming of Jesus. And so I think the fact that the Maccabees are victorious is a result of the hand of God. Even though we don't have a thus saith the Lord, specifically in this case, God did that. They certainly believed that God was on their side. Right? Okay, so another photograph. This is Beth Zur, another one of those locations where there was a battle. And again, you will notice on there that it is covered in what? Covered in snow. Okay, that's all that white stuff on the ground. I point that out. I like to use pictures with snow on them, not so that we think it snows all the time over there, but so that we remember that it does snow over there. And this is up high in the hills, and so they probably get a little bit more snow than down on the plain. All right, so after the victory at Beth Zur, Judas captures Jerusalem. Jerusalem is always the prize, okay? You want to capture Jerusalem. It doesn't matter who you are. You want to capture Jerusalem. So they capture Jerusalem after the victory at Beth Zur. The temple is then purified and rededicated. More about that later, and it will be when we get to Hanukkah, and hopefully we will get to that this morning. The revolt, however, is far from over. The Seleucids have been defeated. Jerusalem is now in Jewish hands. But the Seleucids aren't going to leave it like that. After all, this is an important part of their empire. Why is it important? For my undying respect and admiration, someone tell me why Judea is important to the Seleucids. It separates them from the Ptolemies. That's exactly right. Judea is a border area between Egypt and the rest of the Seleucid Empire. So losing Judea is going to be, as it turns out they are going to lose Judea, it's going to be a significant loss for the Seleucids. They got the Parthians on one side causing problems. That's the main threat. But you got these Jews down in Judea causing problems. That might give an opening for the Ptolemies to do what? Invade and take over that territory again. Okay, so it's a significant problem for them. They're not going to just leave it at that. Judas ends up dying in battle in 160 BC. His younger brother Jonathan then continues the revolt. Notice the family connection. Mattathias is the father. He gets things started. Judas is the military leader after Mattathias dies. He's killed in battle. Another brother, that would be a son of Mattathias, then continues the revolt. So it is staying, if you will, in the family. After the death of Antiochus IV, the Seleucid kingdom is then rocked by instability. Okay, so you got the Jews revolting. Parthians have been dealt with probably by this point in time, but there's still a threat over there in the east. Antiochus IV dies. Anytime a king dies, it always brings instability, especially if there haven't been some plans put into place to deal with that. Remember, Alexander the Great dies. What was his great and glorious plan for his empire after his death? He didn't have one because he didn't expect to die. Okay? This guy probably thought he was going to live forever. At any rate, he was really, really young, and people who are really, really young think that they're going to what? Live forever. Okay? So that's his problem. Antiochus IV, he dies, and then there is instability in the empire. Peace ends up being achieved, interestingly enough, through diplomacy. Okay? It's not achieved on the battlefield, although what happens on the battlefield opens the door for diplomacy. All right? So we're going to have a diplomatic solution to this. Jonathan becomes the high priest in 152 BC, and then he becomes governor in 150 BC. How long is all this taking place? When does the revolt start? Remember the year? It's going to be on the test at the end of class. 167. He becomes high priest in 152. That's 15 years after the fact. He becomes governor then in 150. That's 17 years after the fact. Okay? So it's been going on for quite a while. Simon becomes the governor of the coastal plain. And then, at this point in time, the province of Judea is considered an autonomous province of the Seleucid kingdom. So you don't get to be completely independent, you get to be autonomous. I'm trying to think. Great Britain had a bunch of questions about this in the past, and I think Scotland is now an autonomous region of some sort in the United Kingdom. They have their own parliament again, if I'm not mistaken. Okay? So you do this sometimes if you don't want everything to fall apart. You find some kind of diplomatic solution. I mean, what's happening in the Ukraine right now? Besides the fact that they're still fighting, they're talking diplomacy as well. And the Ukrainians are talking about diplomacy because our next president is probably not going to be interested in sending a whole bunch of money to the Ukraine. And so the Ukrainians kind of see, well, now might be a good time to talk about this. Even Putin has opened that door a little bit to diplomacy. We'll see how that goes, okay? When you can't achieve victory on the battlefield, sometimes the only solution is a diplomatic solution. And so that's what ends up happening in Judea. All right, so looking on, the coin picture popped up. We'll see who that is in just a moment. In 147, so only 3 years after, I got to get this right, after Jonathan becomes governor, okay, fighting starts again. All right, so not settled, not satisfied with the solution, we're going to go back to war. The Seleucid forces are defeated at Jamnia, and then 143 BC, Jonathan is murdered, by a Seleucid general whose name was Diodotus Trypho, who ends up usurping the throne and becoming king. Okay, so there you have a coin with his picture on it. Remember, you get pretty realistic representations of what these folks looked like during that period. All right, so let's keep going on. We end up having dynastic struggles between Trypho and Demetrius II. There's another coin, this time of Demetrius II, so we get coins that show images of these folks. Simon, who is now in control of Judea, sides with the victorious Demetrius II. So this is stuff that's going on in the Seleucid Empire. Simon has to figure out what side he needs to be on to come out in a good way in the end. This is going to happen over and over and over. By the way, one really important guy we're going to talk about later in the class, his name is Herod. It's the same situation. He has to decide what side he's going to be on when there's trouble in the Roman Empire. And he will decide poorly. Then how does he become king? Because he's a really good diplomat who manages to convince the other guy that you really want me on your side too. And that's how all that works. There's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes with these folks. 142 BC, then Judea is granted independence. So no longer an autonomous province. It is an independent kingdom. All taxes to the Seleucid kingdom are suspended as confirmation. If you're paying taxes to a foreign government, you're still under their control. If you don't have to pay taxes anymore, then you're independent, okay? And so that's what's going on here in Judea. I'm going to turn off my mic for just a second. Okay, so mic back on. Let's go ahead and keep going with this. All right, so another quote, again, some more readings from the book of Maccabees. This is First Maccabees again. King Demetrius to Simon, the high priest and friend of kings, and to the elders and nation of the Jews, greetings. We have received the gold crown and the palm branch that you sent, and we are ready to make a general peace with you and to write to our officials to grant you release from tribute. All the grants that we have made to you remain valid, and let the strongholds that you have built be your possession. We pardon any errors and offenses committed to this day and cancel the crown tax that you owe, and whatever other tax has been collected in Jerusalem shall be collected no longer. And if any of you are qualified to be enrolled in our bodyguard, let them be enrolled and let there be peace between us. Okay, so if you've got some Jewish folks that can come serve as in my bodyguard, let me know about that, because I might be interested in doing that. In the 170th year, the yoke of the Gentiles was removed from Israel, and the people began to write in their documents and contracts in the first year of Simon the great high priest and commander and leader of the Jews. First Maccabees chapter 13, verses 36 through 42. So another map to share with y'all is this map. It shows how things look at the end of this period. And so just to give you an idea of the colors here, Modin is right there, Jerusalem's down here. So you get all this territory that is eventually added to them during this period and during the period immediately following this that we'll talk about on Wednesday evening. So it's not, when you look at that map and you kind of compare that to maps of the Old Testament, okay, period, Judea and Samaria, it's not substantially different unless you're looking at the kingdom of David or the kingdom of Solomon, okay? It's pretty much the heartland of Jewish territory is now within control of a Jewish kingdom. All right, so just point out there and make this reference before we show another photo and then leave the topic, that this is the establishment of a Jewish kingdom. However, the kings are from what tribe? They're from the tribe of Levi, because that's where the Maccabees are from. So you have a Maccabee as king over the Jews. Is it a Davidic kingdom? No. Okay? This is not a fulfillment of the promises to David. This is just something historically that happens in the intertestamental period. When will the Davidic kingdom be reestablished? I'm not asking now, future tense. When will, from this perspective, when will the Jewish kingdom, when the Davidic kingdom be reestablished? Okay, when Christ ascends to the throne. All right? Jesus is the fulfillment of the promises to David, not the Maccabees. Okay? But from a standpoint of Jewish history, it's a significant period because now Jews are once again on the throne. It's a Jewish kingdom. Aaron?
That last slide, he says in the 170th year. What is that a reference to?
170th year, I don't know. I could waffle, come up with some kind of an answer. I have no idea. It's whatever the author of, well, not the author of Maccabees. He's recording what was written. So it's whatever that king is using as a reference point. Okay, it might be the establishment of the Seleucid Empire, or it might be some date that he chose to use. Because remember, and I know you know this, Aaron, in the ancient world, people dated things from kings, significant events. Okay, they didn't have AD and BC like we have. So they date it from significant events. So my guess would be it had something to do with the Seleucid kingdom. It's not the Maccabean kingdom because they haven't been around that long to get it dated from their date. But you might notice that the people began to write in their documents and contracts, verse 42 up there, in the first year of Simon, the great high priest and commander leader of the Jews. So now when they're writing documents and dating them, they're dating them to Simon and a completely independent Jewish kingdom, which makes complete sense for them. Okay, Aaron, if you take the mic over to your niece.
We have a friend who identifies as a Maccabean Jew. Is that cultural, geographical, or why do they call themselves that now?
I have no idea. I would have to ask them why they identify in that way. Maybe, this is all maybe, because I really have no idea. It may be because he's descended from the Maccabees. It might be because he's descended from the Maccabees in spirit. Or it might be he's from Modi'in and he knows what Modi'in is all about. I don't know. But I would love for you to ask, is it a him or her? I would love for you to ask her and shoot me a message and let me know, because I've never heard that before. And so I'd like to hear her answer to that. Any other questions or comments? We got one over here, and that was it. Oh, he's coming up to you. He'll have the mic. That way we're on the recording.
Oh, sorry. Just backtracking, 170 years previous would have been 312 BC, and it says that's the first or second, or like year zero for the Seleucid kingdom.
Okay. Yeah, it might be the death of Alexander, because when you count the years you get, I mean, he could have had it wrong when he said 170. It could have been 171, or it could have been the months and how that, okay. Chronology always gets really, really difficult, especially when you're dealing with different chronological systems that are being used. Aaron, you teach a class on chronology, don't you? Or do you teach it as part of your class? No? So I just kind of assume that because you and I have had some chronological discussions over the last 16 years, and so I just kind of assume that you teach a class on that. Okay. Yeah. All right, one last photo to share with y'all just to wrap up the Maccabees as a topic. This is the traditional tomb of the Maccabees, okay? So if you go to Israel and you want to see where the Maccabees are buried, you can go there. It's a traditional tomb. Are they buried there now? Don't know. I think the graves are empty. Okay? And again, it's a traditional tomb, so it's a question whether it's really the tomb, but this will be the place that's pointed out as the tomb of the Maccabees. All right, any questions about the Maccabees at all before we get to Hanukkah? All right, so let's wrap that one up. Hanukkah is tied right with this topic, okay? So looking at Hanukkah, of course, we all know that modern Jews are celebrating that today. It was very interesting this year because the first day of Hanukkah also fell on Christmas Day, which doesn't happen all that often, okay? So I have a friend who's Jewish, and she posted on Facebook, how did Merry Christmaka or something like that. And I just thought that was really kind of funny because she celebrates Christmas culturally, but Hanukkah because she's Jewish. So Hanukkah is also called the Festival of Lights or the Feast of the Dedication. It lasts 8 days, starting on the 25th of Kislev in the Jewish calendar. And that date on the Jewish calendar can correspond to late November or to late December. It's across that entire period on our calendars. Why does it fall on the same day on our calendar every year? Because the Jews have a lunar calendar. Exactly. They have a lunar calendar, and a lunar calendar means that your months are shorter. So what do the Jews do every so many years to keep things in sync? They had an extra month, okay, to keep things in sync. So Hanukkah is always in the wintertime, but it's not always on the same date on our calendar. It's just like Easter. Easter is the same, Passover is the same way. Passover is always in the springtime, but it's not always on the same date in our calendar. So Hanukkah can be anywhere from late November, so Thanksgiving time, all the way to late December, which is Christmas time, if you will. This particular holiday dates to 164 BC, so it is a holiday that comes out of the intertestamental period. It's a significant Jewish holiday that dates to a period outside of the Old Testament, so outside of Revelation. It is observed by lighting the lights of a special menorah, which contains 9 lights. And that particular tradition seems to be very old. So if you are walking around, not so much in our area, but if you were walking around, you might go to the Hallmark shop or something like that. And among all the Christmas decorations, there might be a menorah. Okay? If you have a Jewish friend who's an observant Jew of some sort, they may very well have a menorah in their home. Sometimes, even folks that come from various denominations that feel very friendly towards the Jewish nation as such today, they will sometimes have a menorah in their house as well. There are 9 lights on it. You light 1 light per night, okay? And until you get the 8th that are lit from each day after that. I'm assuming the extra one, the 9th one, is lit in preparation of lighting the others. So you see this a lot. If you went to New York City, where there's a high population of very observant Jews in a very small area, my suspicion is you would see it even more. It dates all the way back again to 164 BC. It is talked about in 2 locations in 1st and 2nd Maccabees. The first of those is chapter 4, verses 36 through 59. The second of those is chapter 10 of 2nd Maccabees, verses 1 through 8. It is also described by Josephus in Antiquities, in his book, Antiquities of the Jews. I jumped ahead a point. Sorry. I'm looking at my screen, and I didn't look at that. Okay, so let's try that again. The 8 days are apparently in imitation of Sukkot, which is the Feast of Booths. Okay? That's apparent. All right? There's a lot of things we really don't know about Hanukkah. Okay, so now, again, it's described by Josephus in his book, Antiquities, chapter 12, paragraphs 6 and 7, if you want to look that up. This particular holiday is also mentioned in the New Testament. It's mentioned in John chapter 10, verse 22. So let's go ahead and take our Bibles and go over to John chapter 10 and verse 22. Okay? John chapter 10, verse 22. At that time, the Feast of Dedication took place in Jerusalem. It was winter, and Jesus was walking in the temple in the colonnade of Solomon. So you get some details here. The feast takes place in the winter. The feast is called the Feast of Dedication, which was another way the Jews referred to Hanukkah. Okay? So it's during this feast that Jesus is in Jerusalem. I get questions about that a lot. Is Jesus observing Hanukkah? This is usually how this goes. I'm going to get you to follow along with me. The feasts of the Old Testament are authorized, are they not? Yes. The Feast of Purim comes out of a canonical book, which means it's inspired by God. So there's authority for that as well. The Feast of the Dedication, or Hanukkah, there's no inspired book that talks about that. So the question then becomes, is Jesus celebrating Hanukkah or not? What does the text say? It gives a timestamp, doesn't it? It says, it is the Feast of Dedication, it's winter, Jesus is where? In Jerusalem. Jesus is going to have a whole lot to say if you keep reading in John chapter 10 about that, all right? So was Jesus observing Hanukkah? Maybe. Okay? And I say maybe because Hanukkah is also a national celebration. And so Jesus may very well be celebrating a national celebration. How many of y'all celebrate July the 4th? Raise your hand if you celebrate July the 4th, okay? Because it's an American national holiday, right? Would it surprise you to know that the rest of the world does not celebrate July the 4th? Unless you happen to be an American living overseas. How many of y'all celebrate Thanksgiving? Would it surprise you to know that the rest of the world does not celebrate Thanksgiving on the 4th Thursday of November? Because it's an American holiday, okay? And with Thanksgiving, is it a quasi-religious holiday? I think so. I mean, what's the idea of Thanksgiving? It was established in order to thank God. And we kind of in the back of our minds think of Thanksgiving as a time to thank God. Now we know as Christians we should thank God all the time, right? But there's an idea of thankfulness behind Thanksgiving. Who are you being thankful to? God, okay? Do I have a book, chapter, and verse for celebrating Thanksgiving? No, I do have a book, chapter, and verse for celebrating being thankful, okay? So it's entirely possible that Jesus is indeed celebrating Hanukkah. Not because it's a religious holiday, but because it's a national holiday. But in the end, my conclusion has to be, I really don't know. Except John tells us when this is happening. It's happening in the temple, it's happening during the Feast of Dedication, and oh, by the way, it's wintertime. Okay? So that's about all I can say about that. Does this mean that we have authority to then celebrate other holidays that are purely religious, that are not in the Scriptures? No, I don't see any here, okay? That's more of an individual question. So it is mentioned in John chapter 10, verse 22. It's the only mention of it in the New Testament, okay? And John uses it, at least in this case, he uses it to mark what the time period is. Now, I will tell you that if you go through the chapter here, and you go down, I'm looking for this because it's giving us the time. Well, no, it doesn't. So never mind. Forget that I just said that, okay? All right, so let's look on at Hanukkah. A really important part of Hanukkah is what's called the miracle of the oil. Why do you have 8 days? Why do you have these candles that are lit in people's homes? Well, what's going on here is a later belief, not a belief found in any of the writings from the period. It's not mentioned in 1 Maccabees. It's not mentioned in 2 Maccabees. It's not mentioned by Josephus either. The miracle of the oil is supposedly, I need to pull up my notes here real quick, okay? Supposedly, the idea that when you're rededicating the temple, you got to have oil for the lampstand, okay? You don't have enough oil. They didn't have enough oil, supposedly. They had enough for 1 day. But their 1 day of oil lasts how many days? 8 days. Which makes it a miracle, hence miracle of the oil, okay? But again, not mentioned in any of the intertestamental texts, not mentioned by Josephus either in the 1st century. It is, however, mentioned in the Babylonian Talmud, which dates to about 600 years after the Maccabean period, okay? So originally, in its conception, it was a celebration of rededicating the temple. And that seems to be all it was in the 1st century, the time of Jesus, the time of Josephus. It's only later that this miracle gets attached to this, and you get the idea that God is performing a miracle during this time. Okay? Let's read from the Babylonian Talmud. This is our last quote. This is, if you want to look it up, it's the Tractate Shabbath 21b. That's how you look that up. What is the significance of the holiday of Hanukkah? Our rabbis taught from the 25th day of Kislev are the days of Hanukkah, which are 8, on which eulogies and fasting are forbidden. So it is a celebratory holiday, okay? When the Greeks entered the sanctuary, they defiled all the oil in the sanctuary, but when the Hasmonean house grew mighty and defeated them, Hasmoneans, they're the Maccabees, same folks, okay? They searched and could find but a single cruse of oil which was sealed with the seal of the high priest, so it would be acceptable for use. And in it there was sufficient oil but for a single day. A miracle occurred, and they lit the menorah from it for 8 days. The next year they established them and made them festival days with Hallel and Thanksgiving. So that's where it comes from. 600 years later is like 500 AD. Okay, so it's a relatively late idea, although it was being celebrated long before that. All right, so 2 photographs. This is from the Arch of Titus in Rome. It's the temple menorah. Count the arms. How many arms does it have? 7. Okay, 1 in the center, 3 on each side. This is a Hanukkah menorah. How many does it have? 9. Okay, so it is different than the temple menorah. So when you go into somebody's home and they have a menorah there, and you say, oh, that's like the temple in Jerusalem. Well, sort of, except it's got 2 extra arms. Okay? All right, any questions about Hanukkah? By the way, for Jewish people today, it is a tremendously important celebration. Just like for a lot of people today, Christmas is a terribly important celebration. Whether you celebrate, to what extent you celebrate, whether you decorate or not, I will tell you we decorate in our house for Christmas, Christmas village, Christmas tree, all of that. I will also tell you we decorated for Christmas like Thanksgiving Eve. I think when Thanksgiving was over, into that holiday, we're going to the next, and we've had our decorations all up. And I can also tell you that Ivana will not allow me to take those decorations down until after New Year's. Okay? Because we like the Christmas village and the Christmas tree and all that. We like the lights. Jews really like Hanukkah. It's a long celebration. It's a happy celebration. And it remains so till today for Jewish folks today. Okay? Any questions or comments about any of this morning? All right. So, for Wednesday night, we're going to talk about... Okay, it went out before I got to it, but okay. So for Wednesday night, we're going to continue on because the Maccabees gain independence. They establish a kingdom. What happens with the kingdom? That's what the Hasmoneans are all about. So we're going to talk about them Wednesday night. Okay? So I hope you all will be back for that. Hope you all will be back anyways for Bible class. Thank you all. For those of you who are visiting with us, thank you for being with us this morning and joining in our class.